guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be making this beautiful tulip cardigan. This is entirely made of your measurements. There are no stitch counts. If you'd like to follow along my size, I am a size 8 to 10. Let's jump straight in. Now you're going to need some 10-ply yarn or Aran equivalent. I was gifted mine from Source of Fibre. It was beautiful to work with and comes in so many colors. I'll list below how much I needed. As for this green color, you can really use just any scrap yarn. I did use Dirty DK from Source of Fibre. You will need a 6mm hook. The hook size for the green yarn will depend on what scrap yarn you use. I used a 4mm hook. Some scissors and a tapestry needle. First up is the ribbing that goes around our waist. We will begin by making a slip knot, then chain 6. Feel free to make this part as wide or thin as you like, simply by chaining more or less stitches. Skip the first chain closest to the hook and go into the second chain. We are going to make a single crochet and then single crochet into the next 4 chains. That completes our first row, nice and simple. We will then chain 1 and flip our work. The chain 1 does not count as a stitch, so we're going to skip that and go into the next stitch in the back loop only. Create a single crochet, and we will now single crochet into the next 3 stitches in the back loop only. When we reach the last stitch, we're going to crochet into both loops. This will ensure our edge is nice and straight. That completes row 2, and as you can see, we are creating a nice little rib. We are going to chain 1 and flip and repeat the steps. Single crochet into the first 4 stitches in the back loop only. And in the last stitch, we're going to pick up both loops for our last single crochet. Keep an eye on your stitch count just to ensure you always have 5 single crochets. Go ahead and make this part as long as you like. I like mine to wrap around my hips, but if you were making a cropped cardigan, then obviously this would be a lot shorter. I ended around 92 centimeters, which was 128 rows, and I am roughly a size 8 to 10. You will want to make sure that your stitch count is in multiples of 4, as when we start working on each individual section, you don't want to have an odd amount of stitches to split our front 2 panels into. If you were to end up with 1 extra stitch, I would just include it in the back panel, so that we have an even amount of stitches for our front 2 panels. We are now going to create rows like so, going back and forth until we reach roughly below our armpits. Here's a look at our ribbing up close. So I like to place a double crochet per every row of ribbing. So to start, I like to chain 2, which equals my first double crochet. We are then just going to place a double crochet into every row of ribbing. Now, if you want to start your rows with a chain 3, that's totally fine. Most patterns do call for a chain 3. I just find my tension can be quite tight, and a chain 2 just looks a lot better. We are going to double crochet all the way to the end. I had 128 rows, so I will need 128 stitches. If you can, I would be writing these numbers down just so that you know exactly what you're doing, you don't get lost, and you can recheck your stitches along the way. I'm just placing my last double crochet of the row, and here you can see what it looks like so far. Now your double crochets might come out a little bit wider than the ribbing, and that's okay. Go ahead and measure this around your hips. Make sure you are happy before moving on. For row 2, we're going to chain 2 and flip. We're then going to place a double crochet in every single stitch all the way to the end. Now I'm really sorry, I can't for the life of me find the next video, so here's a photo of this part completed. I did 23 rows. We're just going to continue on with the same yarn that is attached. But first we're going to grab out your calculator and do a little bit of maths. So I have 128 stitches. We're going to divide that by 4. That's going to give us our stitch count for our front panels. Times that by 2, and that's our stitch count for the back panel. So continuing on where we left off, I'm going to chain 2, which equals my first double crochet, and I'm going to place another 31 double crochets. Now obviously your stitch count could be different to mine, just make sure you write a note so you remember. I went on to make 16 rows. This needs to reach the bottom of your neck without cutting into your armpit. Go ahead and fasten off, and we're going to reattach our yarn to the stitch to the left. Once you have tied your yarn in a double knot, we're going to pull up a loop, chain 2, and double crochet along. I need in total 64 stitches, so my chain 2 will count as the first one, and I will make 63 more double crochets. Here's a look at our first row completed. We are just going to repeat the steps to give us the same amount of rows as our front panel. I need 16, so I will do another 15 more rows. Here's a look at our back panel completed. I will fold over the side so you can see how it's looking. If you would like to attach the top part together using stitch markers, you can then try it on and make sure it's going to fit well. It will give you a better idea if it's going to cut into your armpits. If you are happy, you can go ahead and tie your yarn to the stitch to the left. Again, I'm just going to chain 2 and place another 31 double crochets. Here's a look at our first row, and again I'm going to make another 15 rows so that it matches the other panels. Now I'm not going to fasten off. If yours is the same as mine where your yarn ends on the inside, you can leave it attached. We will be creating a bit of a collar, so we won't be attaching all of the stitches on the front panel to the back panel. One side of the ribbing will look nicer, so we're going to want to make sure that's on the inside when we attach our pieces together. Mine is on the outside, so I'm going to turn my piece inside out. And using my tail, I am going to single crochet my pieces together. Go into the first stitch of the front panel, then into the first stitch of the back panel. Pull up a loop and chain 1. We're then going to single crochet the next 2 stitches together and continue on until you're happy with the collar. I attached 20 stitches together, leaving 12 stitches for the collar. Go ahead and try it on. You don't want it to slip off your shoulders. I probably could have done a few more stitches, but I was happy with the 20. Here you can fasten off and we will attach the other side together. Now don't ask me why. I don't know why I attached this side like this, but basically I counted the 20 stitches from the left and started here. Feel free to just flip over your work and start from the side. It is probably a lot easier. Again, we're just going to attach our yarn, chain 1 and single crochet along. Next, I'm just going to explain briefly how to get the stitch count for the sleeves. You want to end on a certain amount of stitches so that it's going to attach to our vest really nicely. First off, here's our vest completed. Just make sure that it is sitting nicely, you're happy with it before we move on. When I flip it back inside the right way, you can see the seam here. I like to give it a little stretch just to flatten it, but it's looking pretty good. We will block this at the end, so don't worry if the collar's not sitting nicely. It will definitely sit flat at the end. Now here's what I mean about the stitch count. This is our opening for our sleeve. I like to count every single gap along the way except for the tops of the chain 2. Starting with the armpit, we will definitely be counting these 2 stitches. We will then include the sides of these double crochets and the top of the double crochet. We will skip the top of this chain 2. So starting back from the armpit, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Now, normally I wouldn't count the top of this chain 2, but just given it's the shoulder, I don't want any gaps, so I am going to count it now, as well as the single crochet that attached our pieces together. You can go ahead and count the other side. I had another 25 stitches. Add that to the 25 on my front and the 2 at the seam. I will need my sleeve to end on 52 stitches. It is completely fine if you have an odd stitch count. Now for the sleeve, we're going to repeat the steps of the ribbing. So starting off with a slip knot, we are going to chain 6. Skip the first chain and we're going to single crochet 5. Again, you can make this longer or shorter just by making more or less chains. For row 2, we're going to chain 1 and flip, single crochet in the back loop only of the first 4 stitches, and then single crochet into the last stitch. If you need a reminder, feel free to go back to the start, otherwise we'll carry on. And I made 25 rows for my cuff. You can make as many rows as you like, just make sure that it fits around your wrist and is nice and comfortable. We're going to chain 1 and flip, and then fold our cuff in half. Your hook should be at the back. You're going to place your hook into the first stitch of the front and into the back loop only in the first stitch of the back. Pull up a loop and complete a slip stitch. Repeat for the next 3 stitches, remembering only to do the back loop only of the back side. For the last stitch, I do like to go through both loops on the back just to prevent any holes. You can now turn your cuff in the right way, and as you can see, the seam is hardly noticeable. We are now going to work in rounds, and we are going to chain 2 to start. The chain 2 stems from the seam, but it won't be counted as a stitch. We're going to place a double crochet into the stitch to the left. This row of ribbing is quite obvious. We will always place 1 stitch here. Here is another row of that ribbing. Again, really obvious, there's 1 stitch there. In the next row of ribbing, we're going to place 2 double crochets. This is going to start expanding our sleeve out, although it will still be quite fitted. We're going to place the first double crochet into the top of the single crochet. It might be hard to see on camera, but it is separated by a thread of yarn. Go ahead and place another double crochet into the side of the single crochet, and then double crochet into the next row of ribbing. Repeat again by placing 2 double crochets in the next row of ribbing, 1 in the top of the single crochet. You can kind of see the thread here that separates it, and 1 in the side of the single crochet. We're just going to repeat this method all the way around by placing 1 double crochet in the next row and 2 double crochets in the next row. So as you can see, it's starting to expand. If you wanted more of a balloon sleeve, you'd be doing more stitches. Here we are at the end of the row. Here is the starting chain. We're going to skip that and slip stitch into the first double crochet we made. Now I have a total of 38 stitches, that's not including the chain 2. I need to increase to 52 stitches so that it lines up with my vest. For now, we're going to just repeat the row by chaining 2. We're going to flip our work every single row so that our seam stays nice and straight. We're then going to double crochet back the other way, so I've got to make sure that I always have 38 stitches. When we reach the end of the row, we're going to slip stitch into the top of chain 2 and then start again. We're going to maintain the same amount of stitches until we reach about the mid forearm. This will keep it nice and fitted as we don't really need it to expand too much too quickly. For me, this was about 10 rows. Here's what it's looking like so far. We're going to start increasing now so that we have a little bit more space around our elbow. Here's a look at mine on. So when I say halfway up the forearm, I mean roughly halfway between your wrist and your elbow. Now this measurement can easily change depending on where your cuff sits on your wrist. I like mine to be a little bit more slouchy, so I'm going to go with this measurement here. Once you are happy, we are now going to start increasing. We are going to start off by chaining 2 and flipping our work. And in the next stitch, we're going to place 2 double crochets. I like to just increase by 1 stitch each round. This is entirely up to you, but I like the gradual increase. Continue by double crocheting in every single stitch and slip stitching into the top of chain 2. Now, because we've increased on one side, we now need to increase on the other side. So we're going to chain 2 and flip, and place 2 double crochets in the next stitch. So here's a look at the last row's increase and the one we just made. We have one on either side of the chain 2. Again, we're just going to double crochet until we reach the end and then slip stitch into the top of chain 2. Our stitch count is now at 40. Here's another look at our increases, and we are now just going to maintain the stitch count again until we reach the elbow. I tried mine on again just to see if I could figure out how many more I would need. I guesstimated about another 4 rows. You can see here it looks like it's only 4 rows, but when you try it on, it's always different. So here's a look at it so far. I ended up needing another 6 rows. Our seam is looking nice and straight. That's what we want. And when I try it on, you can see that it is up to my elbow. I have a total of 18 rows so far. Again, yours will differ to mine. We are going to start increasing again, and we really need to take into consideration our stitch count so it lines up with our vest. We are now going to increase the next 2 rows, 1 increase on either side of our seam. So we're going to chain 2 and flip, place 2 double crochets in the next stitch, and then double crochet all the way around until we reach the other side, and then repeat that again. Here's the end of the row of the first increase, and the end of the row of the second increase. I now have a stitch count of 42. I need 10 more increases. Here's a look at the increases we just made. 1 here and 1 here. I now have a total of 20 rows. We want this to reach the middle of our upper arm, so halfway between our elbow and our shoulder. I don't think 10 rows is going to cut it, so I'm going to do another 2 rows of maintaining and then start increasing. If you need more stitches but less rounds, I would probably start increasing now. You can always do double increases on your last couple of rounds. If you need more rows than you do stitches, I would make those rows now and start increasing after. Here we are at 22 rows, and look at that beautiful straight seam. Here's a little recap of my rows so far. Let's take it all the way back to the bottom. So I started off with 10 rows of just maintaining my stitches. I increased the next 2 rows. I then maintained my stitches for 6 rows, and then increased another 2 rows, and then maintained for another 2 rows. Here's a look at it on my arm. As you can see, it is well past my elbow now. We are on the home stretch. I'm loving how it is fitting. There is no issue with that at all. So let's hope 10 more rows will be perfect. Now you guys obviously know how to increase by now. We are just doing 1 increase every single row until I have 10 more rows. Again, if you need more increases, you can do double increases on your last couple of rounds, just so that it doesn't get too long. If length isn't an issue, then just increase 1 per round. I now have 52 stitches and I have 32 rows. Here's a look at mine. This is my final sleeve. I love the shape of it. Your sleeve only really needs to come 3/4 of the way up your arm like so, because the vest actually comes down quite a bit. Go ahead and repeat all of that again and make a second sleeve. Now we are up to the most infuriating part. I actually did this quite a few times. My stitch count was correct. I was just counting wrong. Go ahead and grab your vest and turn it inside out. This is the easiest way I've learned to attach sleeves. Obviously, if you know a better way, then go ahead and do that. Now that our vest is inside out, we're going to grab our sleeve and lay it on top of our vest, lining up the seams. Grabbing your leftover yarn and sleeve, you're going to lift up the left panel and basically just push the sleeve through the hole. Make sure it's all nice and neat and make sure your seam is at the bottom where your armpit would be. And we are now going to single crochet around the hole. Starting at the armpit, we're going to place our hook into this stitch here to the left, into the stitch that our tail extends from. We're going to pull up a loop and chain 1. We are then going to place our hook into the side of the chain 2 here and into the next stitch on our sleeve, pull up a loop and complete a single crochet. We are going to skip the top of chain 2 and go into the side of the next double crochet. Single crochet those next stitches together and then go into the top of the double crochet. Continue on until you get to the seam, just remembering we are skipping the tops of the chain 2. So we are going into the sides of the chain 2 and double crochets and into the tops of just the double crochets. My last stitch is the top of a double crochet, and once we've single crocheted them together, we are now going to go into the seam. Place your hook into the seam wherever possible and into the next stitch on the back and single crochet them together. Now, ignoring my rule, we will be going into the top of the next chain 2, so this stitch right here. This is just to prevent any gaps along the shoulder as they will be extremely visible. Again, you should have accounted for that in your stitch count. And now we can continue on crocheting all the way down the other side of the seam, using every gap you come across except the tops of the chain 2. If your stitch count doesn't line up, it is not the end of the world. If you have one extra stitch under the armpit, just attach it to any stitch on the back. It's really not a big deal. If you have an extra 2 or 3 stitches, then yeah, it's probably a big deal. You can now cut your yarn and you're going to take your tapestry needle, thread your yarn into the first single crochet we made, and in between the loops on the last single crochet we made. This is called an invisible join. Again, it's not necessary because this stitch is actually invisible. You won't see it when the cardigan is on, but I like my stitches to look nice and neat when completed, so that's what I'm doing here. And then I just weaved in my end. Here is how it is looking when I turn it in the right way. Please note that these sleeves are different to my final sleeves you saw previously. They ended up being a little bit too long. Grab your second sleeve and again place it through the armhole as well as your excess yarn. Line up your seam, making sure that the yarn is at the bottom where your armpit would be. We are just going to copy the first side, so place your hook through that stitch to the left into the same stitch that our yarn extends from on the sleeve. Pull up a loop and chain 1. And then place your hook into the side of the chain 2. Attach it to the next stitch on the sleeve and single crochet them together. Again, skip the top of chain 2 and go into the side of the double crochet and attach it to the next stitch on the sleeve. Refer back to the first sleeve if needed, but here we are finishing it off and ending with an invisible join. Now is the time to try on your cardigan, see if it's fitting well, if you're liking it. If you are struggling with your stitch count for your sleeves or they're just not working out for you, please send me a message. I am more than happy to help you privately. If they have worked out, then we are ready to move on to the next steps. So here's a little look at the sleeve that's finished on the inside, and then I will flip it out so you can see the whole thing. It's obviously going to feel a little bit silly on, it might feel really blocky. We do need to block it later. That makes it a lot softer, sits a lot nicer, and it's not so stiff. Our collar also won't sit correctly until we've done our trim and again blocked it. Here is a look at the cardigan base all done. If you're not wanting such a quirky cardigan with the tulips and the bright red bows, you could simply make the trim around the collar in the same color and even just a single bow in the same color. I made one briefly for my I-cord tutorial reel and I actually really love the simplicity of it. Moving on to the red trim, we're going to grab our yarn and attach it to the very bottom of the ribbing here. Tie your yarn on to both loops of the first stitch. You can obviously use any color you like. My red is just based off my tulip mug. We are going to pull up a loop and single crochet along the ribbing. So single crochet into the same stitch, and I have 5 stitches in my ribbing, so I will single crochet in the next 4 stitches. For the next part, you can place your stitches wherever you like. I like to place them in the sides of the double crochets and the tops of the double crochets or chain twos. So here we are at the side of the chain 2. We're going to place a stitch in here. Again into the side of the double crochet, and then the top of the double crochet. Here's what it's looking like so far. Repeat this all the way up to the end, and when we get to the collar, we're going to single crochet in the top of chain 2. Yours could be the top of a double crochet. If it is a chain 2, don't skip it. It will make that point nice and crisp. We're then going to chain 2 and single crochet back into the same stitch. We're then going to single crochet in every stitch along the collar. And when we reach the end, we're going to single crochet into each of these 3 stitches here, including the seam. Continue placing a single crochet in every stitch along the back. Here's how it's looking so far. When you've completed the back, we're going to repeat those 3 stitches along the seam. And again, when we reach the corner, we're going to place a single crochet, chain 2, and another single crochet in the same stitch. We're now going to single crochet down the final side. Again, do exactly what you did on the first side to make sure that it is nice and even. After you've crocheted along the ribbing, we're going to chain 1, cut your yarn, and weave in the end. Check around your entire cardigan to make sure there's no loose ends. If there are, weave them through. And now that the boring stuff is over, we are now moving on to the fun stuff. Here is our cardigan so far. We are now going to move on to the red bows. If you saw those loose ends, no you didn't. Go ahead and map out where you want your bows to sit. You may only want 1 or 2. I'm going for 3, and the first one will start here. Moving on to our I-cords, you're going to need 2 per bow, so I am making 6. Don't worry too much about stitch counts or length. They sort of end up stretchy anyway. You just want to make sure they're roughly the same. Start off by making a slip knot. We're going to grab our hook and chain 3 to start. We are then going to place our hook into the second chain and pull up a loop, and then into the third chain and pull up another loop. Now this is our foundation. We're basically going to pull up a loop on every single chain until we reach the top. To do this, we're going to have to drop the last 2 stitches and hold them in between our fingers. We're then going to chain 1 and place the next loop back on the hook. Chain 1, place the next loop back on the hook, and chain 1. That completes the first round. We're going to repeat the steps. So drop the last 2 loops, pick up a loop on the first stitch, pop the second loop back on the hook and pick up another loop, put the last loop back on the hook and pull up 1 more loop. We're going to repeat those steps for as many rounds as you want. Mine roughly came out to about 10 inches or 25 centimeters. It can get a little bit tedious, but you find your rhythm and it ends up flowing really easily. About row 3, you can kind of start seeing the I-cord form. Here it is when it is completed. I love these I-cords. They are much more durable than just a thin, flimsy chain, and they just look really nice. To end, we're going to pull our yarn through all 3 loops left on the hook, chain 1, cut your yarn leaving a long tail for sewing, and go and weave in the other end. To do so, I just like to thread my needle down the center of the I-cord and pull in my tail. Now we're going to go and make all of the other I-cords, so I will meet you at the end. If only it was this quick to make all 6. I love how much stretch they have and they make a perfect bow. Now moving on to the pocket. To start, we're going to make a slip knot and chain 22. You're more than welcome to make this pocket larger or smaller, just make sure that your stitch count is even. I realized I only chained 21, so here I am making one more chain. These 3 chains here count as our first double crochet, so we're going to double crochet into the 4th chain from the hook. We're then going to double crochet into the next 18 chains. And this is what row 1 should look like. We're going to chain 2 and flip to start. If you'd prefer to chain 3, that is totally up to you. My tension is quite tight, so I find a chain 2 is perfect. Go ahead and double crochet all the way to the end of the row, and our last double crochet will be placed into the top of chain 3. Count your stitches at the end of each row to make sure they're correct. And then we'll repeat those steps, so chain 2 and flip, double crochet to the end, and don't forget to double crochet into the top of chain 2. I went on to make 9 rows. This is totally up to you how many you make. And once you're happy, we will move on to making the border. Here's a sneak peek of the border finished. So we're going to use our tail and continue on. To start, we're going to chain 1 and place a single crochet in the same stitch. We're then going to work into the side of the double crochet, then into the top of chain 2, and then into the side of chain 2. And just like our red trim, we're going to continue all the way down until we reach the corner. And in the first chain of our base, so the bottom of chain 3, we're going to place a single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. That's our first corner done, and we're now going to single crochet all along the bottom until we reach the other corner, where we will place another single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. We will now single crochet into the side of the chain 2, then into the top of chain 2, into the side of the double crochet, and into the top of the double crochet. Continue on until you reach the top, where we will create some detail. We will work into the same stitch as previous, so we're going to chain 1 and begin our decrease in that first stitch. So we're going to pull up a loop, place our hook into the next stitch, pull up another loop, and then pull our yarn through all 3 loops. Chain 1, and we're now going to single crochet into these front 2 loops. Place your hook behind those 2 loops, pull up a loop of yarn, and single crochet. Go straight into the next decrease. Chain 1 and place a single crochet behind those 2 loops. Continue on until you reach the end. Here I am placing my last set, so we're going to decrease, chain 1, and single crochet into those 2 loops. We're then going to cut our yarn, leaving a long tail. As you can see, I ran out of yarn, so I'm going to have to reattach some. We're going to grab our tapestry needle and sew our yarn into the first single crochet of the row. And in between the loops of the last single crochet we made. Here's a look at our pockets completed. And we will now move on to the tulip. It took me a few tries to get this as close to the original pattern as possible. I like it though, it's a nice shape and it fits on the pocket well. To start, we're going to make a slip knot and chain 3. Our first chain won't be counted as a stitch. So skipping that first chain, we're going to place 2 single crochets in the next 2 stitches. Our first increase done. And our second. To start row 2, we're going to chain 1 and flip, and place 2 single crochets in the first stitch. Single crochet into the next 2 stitches, and place 2 single crochets in the last stitch. That ends row 2, and for row 3 we're going to chain 1 and flip and place a single crochet in every stitch. And that completes row 3. For row 4 we're going to chain 1 and flip and place 2 single crochets in the first stitch. Single crochet into the next 4 stitches, and place 2 single crochets in the last stitch. For the next 4 rows, we're just going to maintain our stitches by placing 1 single crochet in every stitch. Here we are at the end of row 8, and we're now going to neaten up the border. Single crochet into every row until we reach the chains at the bottom. Here's a look at our first side done, and we will now place 2 single crochets in both these bottom 2 chains. Single crochet into each row up the other side, place your last single crochet, chain 1, and in the same stitch we're going to place a half double crochet and a double crochet. In the next stitch we'll make a double crochet and then a half double crochet. Slip stitch into the next stitch, and that completes our first petal, and we are going to repeat that again. Half double crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet and then a half double crochet in the next stitch, then slip stitch into the next stitch. That completes our second petal, and one last time we're going to place a half double crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet and half double crochet in the next stitch, and we're going to end on one final single crochet into the same stitch. That completes our tulip. We're now going to cut our yarn, leaving a long tail for sewing. Grab your tapestry needle and we're going to thread our yarn into the first single crochet we made. And in between the loops of the last single crochet we made. Go ahead and make a second tulip, and we will move on to making the leaves. Go ahead and grab any scrap yarn or whatever you have decided for this part. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, as I know the yarn is quite dark. I'm going to be working with a 4mm hook. And to start, we're going to make a slip knot and chain 6. We are going to slip stitch into the next chain on the hook. Single crochet into the next stitch. Half double crochet into the next 2 stitches. And a double crochet into the last stitch. We are then going to chain 5 for our stem. You can make this longer if you wish. We're going to skip the first chain and single crochet in the next 4 chains. Here's how it's looking so far. We are now going to move on to the second leaf. We're going to chain 6. Slip stitch into the next stitch. Single crochet into the next stitch. Place a half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And double crochet into the last stitch. In the same stitch, we're going to place a half double crochet and a single crochet. We will now slip stitch into the single crochet of our stem. As you can see, it gives us a nice rounded edge. We will now work into the loop to the left. We will make a single crochet and a half double crochet. We will now cut our yarn, leaving a long tail for sewing. Thread your yarn into the chain that the double crochet stems from. And in between the loops of the last half double crochet. Go ahead and weave in the other end. I like to weave it up through the stem. And that is our leaves all completed. Stretch it out to give it a better shape, and we're going to go ahead and make a second one. Here's a look at them with our tulips, and we're going to now sew them onto our pockets. Lay them on your pockets and map out where you want them to sit, and we will start off by sewing on the leaves. Make a note of which stitch you start on as well as which row, just so that we can match it up with the other side. I find it easier to flip my patch as I am right-handed and we're going to work around it anti-clockwise. Here I am just counting my stitches. I will be starting off in row 1 and I will have 8 stitches to my left. Thread your needle around the double crochet. If you want it to be invisible, then you'll have to go through it. However, I'm not too fussed as you won't see it on the inside of the pockets. Thread your yarn back up into the next stitch of the leaf, and then back down through the next stitch of the leaf. Continue sewing all the way around until you reach the other side, and when you reach the point, make a note of how many stitches are to the right of it so that you can match it on the other side. I'm not going to lie, but sewing on appliques or pockets or all of these little things are probably like my pet peeve. I hate doing it. It's like my boys could sense my frustration because they went and picked me these flowers from the garden. They're so beautiful. Anyway, back to sewing. This is what it's looking like so far, and when you reach the end, you're just going to sew your yarn around another stitch and make a couple of double knots. And then weave in your loose end. Not gonna lie, but mine turned out a little bit wonky. I ended up just maneuvering it around with the needle in hopes that it would look a bit better. Here's a look at it against the saucer. It definitely does not match perfectly, but it was the best I could do. I tried to make it like 5 times, I swear. Now onto our tulip. This is the final part of the pocket. Again, we're just going to map out where we want it to sit and start sewing. I find this is easier to do than the leaves. I think with the leaves, it's a very funny shape and you've got to map out exactly where everything is going to sit, compared to the tulip is just a simple round shape, so it's a lot quicker. We are on the home stretch now. Keep going. We've only got to do this once again and then sew our pockets onto the cardigan. When we reach this little part here where the stem is, we're just going to make sure that the tulip sits on top and you thread your needle through both appliques. Lastly, we're going to thread our yarn around any stitch on the back and tie it in a double knot. And weave in your end. Now to repeat that whole process for the second pocket, and once we're done, we're going to sew them onto the cardigan. It is worth trying your cardigan on first and mapping out where you want the pockets to go. Sometimes they sit a little bit different once the cardigan's on. I'm going to line mine up so that I have 1 row of double crochets showing above the ribbing, and about 3 double crochets on the right, about 1 inch from the red trim. Again, make a mental note of which row you're going to start in, just so that it matches on the other side. For the second pocket, I stretched my pocket too far while I was sewing and I ended up almost at the ribbing by the time I was finished the bottom stitches. So now I like to lay it out and just pull my needle through gently as to not stretch the pocket. When you reach the end, again, you're going to tie it around itself in a double knot and weave your end in. I was getting super frustrated by this point because my yarn wasn't gently gliding through. I was getting so mad. I can't tell you how good it feels to be weaving in those ends. I also totally forgot we still have the bows to stitch on, so that will be coming up next. I loved working with this yarn. It is perfect for the pockets. I have made pockets before and they were so flimsy and stretchy, and these just sit really nice and firmly. Here are our finished pockets, thank God. Now let's move on to the bows and then we will block. Again, you can try it on to see where you want your first bow to sit. The higher the bow, the shorter the collar will be. I decided to place mine about here because I really wanted a wide open collar. That meant my second bow lined up roughly with the top of my pockets. I did also find it helpful to tie my I-cords into a bow. It helped me visualize the final product. I used a needle to map out where I was going to place the bows. Once you are happy, we can start sewing the bows on. This part was a lot more simple than I thought it was going to be, which was a nice way to end. It is probably easier to put a needle on both sides. I had to just count mine to make sure I was lining them up properly. For the last time, grab your needle and we're just going to sew into the trim and back into the I-cord. I don't really have a fancy way of doing this. I just do whatever looks good. I then go back into the trim, then for the last time into the I-cord, back into the trim, and then we will tie it in a double knot and thread our yarn through the center of the I-cord. This is actually my first YouTube tutorial, so please drop your comments below. I need all the advice I can get, any feedback you want to leave, anything you want me to change for the next tutorial. I know there was probably parts of this video that were too quick. It was a very long video in itself, so I didn't want to go over the hour. So please let me know if you'd prefer longer tutorials and more in depth, or if you like these more fast-paced tutorials. This is our first bow completed. This is how I like to tie my bow. They can be a little bit fiddly to get the perfect bow. But once I've tied my bunny ears, I actually sort of rotate my bow to the right. It gives me a perfect bow every single time. Our last step is blocking. I decided to soak my cardigan in warm water. I then used 2 towels to squeeze out the excess water, and then I laid it out in the sun to dry. Now it is winter here in Australia, and even though it's not that cold, it still took 3 days to dry. I ended up putting it inside under the fan and it dried pretty quickly. I used pins to secure the edges that were sticking up, which was mainly the bottom of the trim and the collar. Instead of soaking it, you could use a steam iron or even just spray the collar and the trim with some water. And that is it, my friends. Our cardigan is all done. Here's a little look at it on. I am in love with it. It is definitely not as heavy as I thought it would be on. It is super comfy and so warm. I can't wait to make another one. I really hope you enjoyed making this cardigan as much as I enjoyed making this series. Once again, if you have any questions, please drop them below. If you liked this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on those notifications. Our next project will be this mug here. I have so many ideas for it. If you want to join in, please follow me on Instagram or TikTok and you can help me decide. Other than that, we are all finished. I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye!